Okay, so tonight we have our really wonderful speaker, Naomi Hirahara. And Naomi is a slightly different speaker than we normally have because she's not focusing on the botanical, but she is a Mary Higgins Clark Award winner, an Edgar Award winning mystery writer. She's written 2 nonfiction books about the Japanese flower market and another one about Japanese gardeners. Naomi is local, grew up in Altadena, and so she's writing about things that we all know about. And Naomi, if you're ready to come up, I'd like to welcome you.
As you can see, I'm allergic to podiums. So I think I'll stand here since I won't be a floating head for you all. Yes, thank you, Carol, so much for inviting me. And I'm really excited to be here. You all are my people. Even though I have a black thumb, I love gardens and I love flowers and plants. And that's why they're integrated in so much about what I write about. And there's a lot of friends. We broke bread earlier today with some new friends with the society, but here when I arrived, there's a lot of old friends here. And there's some members, very esteemed members of the nursery, Japanese American nursery community. I won't embarrass them because they told me not to say anything, but you could find out maybe after the meeting and just introduce yourself. So it's really wonderful to kind of see these 2 worlds kind of converge together. So yes, my talk today is The Gardener Did It, and it's following the clues of Japanese American landscaping and flower growing in Southern California. I won't reveal the identity of this mystery gardener quite yet, but I will, but you will find out before the night is over. So my talk today will primarily revolve around 2 books that I have written. One, this was for the Southern California Gardeners Federation. How many of you are familiar with that organization? Okay, yeah. A handful of you. It was primarily started by Japanese immigrant gardeners as well as Japanese American gardeners in 1955. So in the 1990s, they approached me because they were going to celebrate their 45th anniversary, and they wanted a history because in Japanese American circles, who were the ones being celebrated? It was the very wealthy farmer that had acres and acres. But how about the lowly gardener? You know, at one time, 1 out of 10. Well, actually, before World War II, 1 out of 3 Japanese men were gardeners. So it was such an important profession. After World War II, it was like 1 out of 10. So when I said I would do it, when I arrived in their office, they actually have offices in the Toy Town area of downtown LA, just a little bit south of Little Tokyo. I encountered all these photo albums, and it was mostly men in suits. And I go, this is not going to do. We need you at work. So what I had to do was meet with a lot of families and kind of go through their photo albums. And it was a type of thing that they were mostly men. You know, this was an occupation they did to, you know, for survival, and they didn't necessarily want to pose for photographs. But we were able to find a few, which was helpful. This particular one, our cover boy, is Aiba Kurihara, and this was probably taken around 1938. He was a gardener in I think around the Echo Park area, and he became this Japanese immigrant, very important leader of this particular federation. So when it came to finding photographs, it's not surprising that the photos that I encountered the most were men with their cars, men with their trucks. And this one was Osama Kobayashi, and this is him. He came originally from Sacramento, raised in Japan, came back. This one was taken in Pasadena, and I love how he kind of adorns his gardening truck, you know, with plants. And this is him a little bit later in 1940. And here he had graduated to work in Beverly Hills. And one interesting thing was there were, you know, gardeners, Japanese immigrant gardeners, like as early as the late 1800s. And the way they kind of developed their profession was they had boarding houses. And there's an academician who called those were the gardening colleges. So that's where you came to this country, you got into this boarding house, and you were trained. You know, basically young men were like the apprentice of these more experienced gardeners. And usually women, you know, housewives would be the ones who kind of this is after World War II, many of them would make the decisions on how the garden would be cared for, and they would contact the boarding house. So that's how a lot of these Japanese gardeners got their first jobs. So here with Osamu in Beverly Hills, what was interesting is during the Depression, there were white gardeners wanted to kind of preserve their profession because it was a time where it was hard to find work, right? So they didn't want Japanese gardeners in Beverly Hills. So there was a movement to keep them out. And that's when the Japanese immigrant gardeners said, we have to mobilize so this doesn't happen. And that's when the first group, the League of Southern California Japanese Gardeners, kind of got started in the 1930s. Now, we all know that during World War II was the forced removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. And this particular photo was taken at Manzanar. And we have two representatives actually with the Manzanar Committee. There's annual pilgrimage in April. So if we could have Bruce and Vicky kind of wave their hands in the crowd. Yeah, so if you have any questions of the Kunitomis, please go and ask them. So if you go to the site, and how many people have gone to Manzanar? So quite a few. Have you gone recently? Because there's been, it's very interesting. There's a lot of things that are being restored on the site, National Historic Site, including the gardens. So what was interesting, it was primarily here in terms of creating the gardens in the Owens Valley in this particular detention center. A lot of them were actually nurserymen, and they were the ones who had contacts with white nurserymen here, like in Southern California. So if they would make requests. One was F.M. Uematsu, and I'll talk a little bit about him later, but he owned a couple nurseries, one in Montebello, the other in Sierra Madre. So he was able to get like cherry trees sent to the desert, this area, not quite desert, but the very barren Owens Valley. One particular area in Manzanar was an orphanage called the Children's Village, and people felt they wanted, plants and things to kind of encourage the spirits of the children and the young people. So a garden was kind of created there. There are other people like another pioneering gardener named Shoji Nagumo. He was the leader of the League of Gardeners. And he was sent to a camp in Wyoming, Hart Mountain. And he just felt that it was terrible that children could not be around green things. So he also made arrangements, he was a gardener, not a nurseryman, for plants to be sent over, transported to that particular camp. They created victory gardens and things like that. So even behind barbed wire, some of these individuals were creating green things, which I think is remarkable. So, okay, then after camp, people were released and they had to make a new life for themselves. And this particular photo is of Mac Yamaguchi, who was a family friend. And he got this beautiful Model T, I think it's Model A, from a hostel, Evergreen Hostel in Boyle Heights. That's where people were living temporarily. And then I don't know why he put his lawnmower in front of the truck, but that's how and apparently he was drag racing in Altadena as well with other, competing with other gardeners early in the morning. But, so like I mentioned earlier, this was for these men straight out of camp, trying to rebuild their lives. They took advantage of the housing market because there were so many, especially like soldiers with the GI Bill that were purchasing these small homes that had yards. And at the same time were these Japanese Americans who needed work right away. So some of them were very skilled at their work. Some weren't, but there was like this halo effect. If you're Japanese, you know how to be a gardener. So and actually at that particular time, it wasn't a bad way to make a living. If you're ready to work as hard as you can. And Mac says that he was working so hard, he didn't even want to knock on the door of the customer to receive the check. He asked them to put it on the clothesline so he could just grab it and go to his next job. Another thing that was kind of interesting in terms of these maintenance gardeners is that they were also did this work as a transition to something else. For instance, a lot of gas stations, right? They were gassing up all of these gardening trucks. And so a lot of Japanese Americans got into, they purchased a gas station. And then all these Japanese gardeners would go to that particular gas station. In Mac's case, in South Pasadena, there was this Collier's Chevrolet dealer. And the dealer was very smart because he noticed there's all these Japanese Americans coming to buy pickup trucks. I need to get a salesman, a Japanese American salesman. So he hired Mac. And then Mac noticed, all these people, all these families, they need insurance, car insurance, life insurance. So he segued into the insurance business. So it's very interesting how gardening became this transitional work that really led to other things. Now, these gardeners too were cultural ambassadors. I think every one of you in your neighborhoods, you know of a Japanese style garden, right? Somewhere in your neighborhood. And many of them, they created them before World War II, kind of like as a goodwill gesture. There's one, I'm sure you're aware of the one in Sierra Madre Elementary School. There was one at one time at Roosevelt High School. So these immigrant parents, they wanted to kind of, as a point of pride, use their skill to gift a community or school with their landscaping skills. Here in this particular photo is one of my favorite Japanese community gardens. It's at the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center, right there at 244 South San Pedro. It's that garden, it's actually on the basement level, so you can only access it if you go into the building and take the elevator down, but you could kind of lean over and kind of see it. And that particular garden was designed by Takeo Uesugi, who was a Cal Poly Pomona professor. And then another part, because so many Japanese Americans were gardeners, it meant it was not only a profession, it also meant community and family. So this is me holding the perch. My dad is in the background. He's in the waiters, and he loved going ocean fishing, and and he was a gardener himself. And and the other photo is myself. My maternal grandmother came from Hiroshima to kind of help out with my brother, who's a year old. She's holding him. And that's my mother in the glasses. And the other kids are like cousins and family friends in the Altadena area. And everyone's father was a gardener. So it meant going on gardeners' picnics. And many of these men were the ones, even though they weren't the wealthy farmers, they were the ones who were donating to the local, to create the Japanese language school or the cultural center. So they were really the lifeblood of our community coming out of the incarceration experience. So I wrote this series of mysteries. And my amateur sleuth is a person named Mas Arai, and he's a gardener and Hiroshima survivor who solves crimes. And he was inspired by my own father. So the mystery gardener here is my dad. And his full name was Isamu, but he was known as Sam. So Sam Hirahara. And I think that this particular photo, I'm sure that one of his customers was the one to take it, to kind of say, I have a Japanese gardener, here he is. But so my father's background was he was born in Watsonville, California, and when he was very young, he and and his older siblings went to Hiroshima and stayed there for quite a long time. So he, in the photo on the left-hand side is him. He's probably like 16 or 17 years old, and this was during World War II. So what happened in Hiroshima was that for the older kids, they suspended school, and so these older children had to work in some ways, and my father was assigned to the Hiroshima train station. So that's where he was when the bomb was dropped. He survived. Unfortunately, a lot of his friends did not. But because he was a full American citizen, he didn't have dual citizenship, he was able to easily return back to America, his birthplace, like I think in 1946 or 47. When he came back, he returned first to to Watsonville, and he was kind of like a migrant farm worker, and then eventually did strawberry tenant farming, and eventually came to the Pasadena area to be a gardener. So, and he was a gardener for, I guess he was, he worked until like his 80s, so very, very, like at least 50 years. Oh, okay. And so I was inspired. I was very close to my father, and I just thought people would always kind of disregard, not give him his full respect, because they would just probably see this white van, a gardener's van, okay, it's just a gardener. But he had this fascinating history, and that's why I wanted to make him like this, the hero of this mystery series. And so the first book took me 15 years before it was finally published. So here it is, Success. And it was called Summer of the Big Bachi. Bachi means what goes around comes around. So that's what happens this one summer in the life of Monster. So I gave some of you this card. If you want this card of some of my other mysteries, raise your hand. My husband will give it to you. But it shows, so with the Monster mysteries, there's a total of 7. And the one I'm passing out has my 6th mystery on it, Sayonara Slam. And I have an excess number of these cards, that's why I'm giving it away. But also I think it's very appropriate because this Sayonara Slam takes place at Dodger Stadium. And with our new additions to the team, I thought it was, and this takes place at the World Baseball Championship, Korea versus Japan. So there's a lot about the relations of those 2 countries. It's about knuckleball pitchers, and it's also about, do you all know there's a Japanese garden in the parking lot? You know, that mound beyond the parking lot? Did you all know that? Yeah, so that's, and I kind of trespassed. I think they cleaned it up. They're probably really cleaning it up now, but I kind of, you know, it was very much in disarray when I wrote this particular book. So, yeah. So what I would say in terms, I've done nonfiction, but in terms of my mysteries, I say I use lies to tell the truth, because there's just the truth of just being human, the humanity of people, that sometimes I could write more honestly in fiction, but I also use my mysteries to write a lot about Japanese American history and culture. So this was my 2nd one called Gasa Gasa Girl, which took place actually in New York City. And the clue here is this mystery gardenia. And this particular one, they call it Kitty's Gardenia. And it was, this was grown by a family called Kitagawa, the Kitagawa family. They established glass houses, greenhouses in the Ocean Park area, so around Santa Monica. And so this became a clue. So there's a dead body. There's a dead body in this Japanese garden, and there's this mystery gardenia. And of course, the NYPD booth, NYPD, they don't, you know, so it's a flower. But Masarai is on the scene, so he knows that this is not just a regular flower. So this is a photo of the Kitagawa nursery, and this was, I think this particular photo was taken in the 50s or 60s. So I'm segueing to my other topic, which is actually the flower market. I wrote a book for the Southern California Flower Market, and they were celebrating their own kind of milestone. I think actually a lot of old-timers, they wanted people to remember how it all started. So the Southern California Flower Market, well, you know, there's 2 markets, as you all know, and it's informally called the Japanese market, and the other one is called, quote, the American market, facing each other on Wall Street. But the first one was the Japanese market, established in 1912. It was first, like, I think, in Los Angeles Street, and then was moved to Wall Street. So it was really interesting for me to do research and interview people regarding the flower market, so versus the gardeners. 2 very different populations. I felt like the gardeners, they were more the rebels, that's where you found people who did poetry, the tanka. And whereas I thought that the flower market folks were more established, the people, because there were alien land laws, right, beginning in 1912, so that Asians, mostly directed towards Japanese as well as Chinese, could not buy land, right, in California. So those early immigrants who came early, before that particular time, were able to buy the land. So they were the ones who were able to grow perennials. Those who came later, they had to move every 7 years on leased land, and they would tend to grow the annuals. But early on, when the first ones arrived, what they would do, they would determine where to grow their flowers according to transportation routes. Because in those early days, they brought over from Japan these bamboo suitcases. So they would put packed flowers in those suitcases, and they would carry it around on their shoulder, and they would get on the train. And the thing about flower sales, it was centralized, right? So the market was in downtown LA, so they had to bring their flowers to downtown LA. So I found that very, very interesting. So Burnett or Long Beach was one of the early places where flower growing took place. I knew that this group had a lot of women, so I included some photos of women at work. What was interesting was, in terms of the flower growers, it was a family enterprise, and that was not looked kindly by non-Japanese because they thought it was these women provided unfair advantage. And America being a Christian society, it's like don't work on Sundays and women shouldn't be out there. But the Japanese, they had to survive, so they worked 7 days a week, and there was some tension about that. So the Japanese leaders, they kind of encouraged, okay, if you're going to have women working out there, have them wear more feminine outfits, so wear little bonnets. So, that's why, hence this particular photograph. Okay, so during World War, this photo was taken before World War II. So another thing that was different about the flower growers compared to the gardeners was that they had very close relationships with white people, because they were they owned the flower shops, they were various vendors. So there was more interaction with white people. So this particular photo, this is the farm of Shin Ichigoya in San Diego Valley. And Mr. Goya, he's like third from the left. And he was at one time a partner of this United Wholesale Florist. They were a shipper. And another partner was this man second from the left, Jacob Decker. I think he was a European immigrant. But when Pearl Harbor, when the bombing of Pearl Harbor happened, Mr. Goya sold his share back to Jacob Decker because they kind of suspected that the Japanese would be targeted in some ways. And this Mr. Decker was really remarkable in that he was the caretaker of so many farms that were owned by Japanese Americans who were removed from their homes and had to leave California. And this United Wholesale Florist also took care of the Southern California farm market. So it was not lost, and the flower growers were able to return back. So it was a different kind of situation. This is a photo on the right-hand side. This is the Yoko Miso family. They're from San Fernando Valley, and they were known as the king of the vernaculars. And this is, I think this is a beauty queen, she's also a member of the flower growing community, and she's holding the vernaculars. So the Yoko Miso, the patriarch, when they all had to leave their homes in San Fernando Valley, he told his children, bring seeds with you, bring vernacular seeds. So they did, and I think they grew some. Some of the Yoko Miso boys were very active in growing the Victory Garden at Manzanar, as well as, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Guayumi project that happened. It was it was first started by some people connected with Caltech, but there was a lot of interest in creating a natural rubber to compete with synthetic rubber, and it would come from this plant Guayumi, and they actually grew Guayumi in Manzanar, so really fascinating. And it didn't take off, unfortunately. And the Chameleons, going back, I mentioned Miyosaku, or FM, Francis Miyosaku Uematsu, and many of you are probably familiar with that name in conjunction with Descanso. And so Manchester Bodie, the owner of that the Descanso property, he was avid camellia collector, and so was Mr. Uematsu. And so when the Uematsus had to leave, Manchester Bodie bought a lot of the Uematsu's camellias plants. So when I was, I was trying to find out what was the real relationship between the Bodies and other Japanese American growers. It was actually a lot more complicated, and there's a professor, Wendy Chen, and she uncovered a lot of lawsuits and other things that kind of showed that Bodie did, he did kind of take advantage of the situation. I mean, I guess the good part of it was these particular flowers still exist today, and that he did pay some money, but it wasn't probably as much as the properties and plants were worth. So it's kind of a very nuanced story. But I am happy that we still have the Chameleons today. And in fact, there's going to be a program at Descanso celebrating Mr. Uematsu's granddaughter, Amy. She passed away recently, but they always honor her. She was a very acclaimed poet. So I'll be I think it's going to be on March 30th. So if you're a member of Descanso, kind of look for that. A lot of her poetry will be read on that day in the outdoor auditorium. Okay, so I think this is close to the end. I can take questions. And here's another female gardener. This is Annie Takata. She's from San Fernando Valley. And her story is, one, she's allergic to plants. Another thing is, I think she and her husband had 5 children. Another thing is her husband died. So Annie had to make a living, so she took over her husband's group. And the Southern California Gardeners Federation, which is a pretty macho organization, they really reached out and helped Annie to thrive and support her, able to make a living as a gardener to support her family. So I mentioned that gardeners were known for their poetry. So I wanted to, I have one more slide after this, but I wanted to read a few tanka poems that they're originally in Japanese, but these are the translations. So this one is, satisfied, my gardening work done, I drive at sunset, gaily turning my wheel home. and that was by Takata. And here's one. There's some really hilarious poems. There's a book in the back that has a bunch of, it's a whole collection of Gardner's tanka, which is kind of like haiku, but not quite. This is another poem. Together we've earned this power mower and me, a gardener's house. And that was by Ishikawa Bonsai. These are all pen names. And this last poem, let's see. Okay. Planting these seeds, remnants of a farmer's life, flowering still. And that was by Fujimoto Suige. My last slide is about my next project. Do you know where this is? Huntington. Well, it's not Huntington, but this was the house in the back is the house that was moved to the Huntington. This was the Marshes, G.T. Marsh was the owner of this tea garden. If you know old Pasadena, it was like 2 blocks south. There's like Castle Green, an old hotel, 2 blocks south of there was this. You could get into this garden for a nickel. And and then there were people working there that would give you some tea and biscuits. And the garden wasn't able to financially survive. And when Henry Huntington, superintendent, was looking for some kind of Japanese structure to move to the Huntington Ranch, he seized upon this particular Japanese house, and that was moved over. So my next, I'm writing historical mysteries now. Moss, that's only 7 books. So my historical mysteries, it started with Park and Division set in Chicago, then Evergreen set in Boyle Heights, and the one I'm working on right now is in Pasadena. It's called Crown City 1903. So I'm having a wonderful time doing research, and that was kind of like such, there was such a craze about all things Japanese. And it kind of bled into the arts and crafts movement. So those are kind of like the themes that I'm exploring at this particular time. But anyway, I'll take, before I take any questions, I want to say that I was happy to meet Michelle again. And Michelle, you belong to here, right? To this society. Oh, are you going to join? I think you should join. And so her expert, she wants to revitalize the Japanese black pine. And that's going to be her area. And she just showed me on her phone, she lives in Gardena, and she's been on Google Maps, she's been kind of tracing all these Japanese black pine in people's yards. So that's really exciting. So please talk to Michelle. And there's also Susie Kozawa, who her family owned Tokyo Florist, that you probably know not very far from here. And she's working on a special art project, right, revolving around the house. Are there any questions for comments? Yes. Yes.
Question. So that statistic you mentioned early on about 1 in 3 men being gardeners, and that refers to the United States, correct?
No, that was in Cal. That was actually, I think that's specifically, that was census. I believe the 1 out of 3 might have been in Southern California.
Okay, I was curious, do you have any ideas what that would have been in Japan at the time?
Oh, it would have been 1 out of 3. And I think gardening is very different in Japan, right? Because the whole notion of having, a garden is kind of, well, it depends, like urban areas, you're not even going to have a garden, right? I mean, probably Salvador can he would know better than I would. But I think the whole concept of maintenance gardening is, I found, is more like a California thing or American thing, whereas in Japan it's more like the art of landscape gardening, you know, so it's kind of a different thing altogether. And I think there's something built in about Americans about having pride in your, you know, personal garden and lawn. You know, it's very American, and it's not the same thing in Japan at all. Yeah, and I know with the Hirahara family house, our Japanese garden, it's not visible from the street. You know, you have to. The whole building is built around the garden, and it's only seen, you know, it's in the center of it. But yeah, it was just, there was so many the immigrants who came over were, you know, rice farmers, right? So they were involved in agriculture in Japan, so it was more rice-based, but they were able to parlay their know-how to do other types of gardening. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Well, I moved to LA in like 1989, and I always had this impression that Japanese gardeners were really a prestigious thing to have. Was that always the case?
I think it was. I mean, it was really interesting.
Would you repeat the question?
Oh yeah. So Carol was saying she moved here in 1989, and she had the impression that it was very prestigious to have a Japanese gardener. Of course, by then it was hard to get a Japanese gardener because most of these men, and there were some women, they didn't necessarily want their own children to become gardeners. Many of them maybe went to school and became more of a landscape, you know, more of that higher caliber kind of landscaper. And you know, maintenance gardening is more a profession. You know, now we have a lot of Latinos, and it depends on, like, when I talk to people in the San Francisco area, there might be more Vietnamese or East Indian kind of that have worked in that profession. So it is like kind of this transitional work, and many of these people went into other things. What was really funny was when I found a story. It was Dan Kuramoto, who was one of these. He was a musician with this band called Hiroshima, and I think he got a job at a college, and he actually killed everything. And they hired him back because it was like this halo that you're Japanese, you got to know what you're doing, and he really did it. You know? And in my Mas Sarai books, I do have some gardeners who like totally chop a tree bald. You know, they're not really taking care of what they're doing. So there were, you know, all sorts. There's a whole gamut. There are people who are very careful, and then for some it was just, oh, this is an entry level. You know, this is a job for my family's survival, and maybe they didn't take utmost care. I know in Saburo Ishihara's case, he was educated in Japan. He was growing chrysanthemums when he was a child, so he had a great love for plants. And many people from Japan, I know, have come to the San Diego nursery, you know, in the horticulture area to learn from him. And so there's all these different levels of gardening. I mean, the Japanese Americans. Yes?
Is there anything more you can say about the Japanese owned nurseries, especially SoCal, for instance?
What's really interesting was there was a very prominent nurseryman. His last name was Nishi, and his particular nursery was located where Veterans Administration, the VA hospital, you know, that part of town. And he also specialized in, I think, growing roses. And so, of course, he lost most everything during World War II. But then other members of the family, they established nurseries. That's right there on SoCal. And I know the Nishi family was one of them. And I think, what is it, Yamaguchi? I don't know. I know there's the bonsai nursery there. Probably a lot of you know more specifics about those nurseries than I do. But of course, SoCal was one of the areas where there was a lot of, there was a prominent Japanese population. Can anyone else speak to the SoCal nurseries? Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions? Yes.
What kind of material did Japanese
I can't quite hear you.
what kind of material Japanese produced from Japanese things?
What type of material?
What kind? What kind of plant?
Oh, what kind of plants?
Yeah.
Well, I think what was kind of interesting when I was doing research for this project, I mean, Michelle, we were just talking about the pine, right? Why don't you come up here and talk a little bit about your black pine project?
Hi, my name is Michelle Nakamura. My dad was also a gardener, like Naomi's. And I'm actually a gardener. I'm a modern day gardener, I guess. So I do the Japanese black pine trees, but I'm also being asked to do like mandinas and everything in the Japanese garden. So in terms of my project, during the pandemic actually, I wasn't sure what to do, so I started trimming these 5 pine trees that my dad had planted in our front yard. I didn't know what I was doing. So I went on YouTube and I watched all these bonsai videos, but that was for bonsai and it wasn't for the ones that are in the ground. So I was able to volunteer at a nursery, get some experience there, and then I started working for a Japanese gardener. He's from Japan. I worked with him for 4 months. And it's just, there's so many on what I think Naomi, I show this a lot. So my project, and you can't see this, but Google Maps, I'll just describe this. In my neighborhood, I live by Artesia and Normandy. It's a house I grew up in. And like I said, there's 5 pine trees, 4 now because I killed one. Yeah, it was beautiful, so I'm very careful with my plants trees down. But I was plotting them during the pandemic. I'd go on walks. I'm like, there's another pine tree, a house with a pine tree, and there's another one. So this is Google Maps, and I'm telling them, like by my house, in a 1.5 square mile area, there are 118 houses with at least 1 Japanese pine tree in the front yard. So some of them have like 3 or 5 in the backyard. I don't know how many they have, but I really want to try to preserve this because this is really part of our identity, I feel. I was just telling Naomi that the pine tree really represents, I think, the resilience of the Japanese American character. And like a bonsai, you could be bent and shaped in different ways. You could be put in a pot and be very constrained, but you could be beautiful. And I think that's like my dad was in Manzanar, actually Naomi was the editor on my dad's book. It's called From Manzanar to Mount Whitney. And you can go through this experience, but be so resilient and be so beautiful because it's like the shikataganai or the shogai, you take that and you persevere and you come out more beautiful. And this is my project, and I really want to start with Gardena. It's my hometown, and I really want to try to get the government involved, because to really get somebody who knows what they're doing to prune a tree, it costs a lot of money, because we spend 2 people, we could spend 1 day on a tree. So it could be like $900 for a tree. But we try to keep our prices down, and especially for my community, I want to do it at a discount price to help just preserve these trees. So, and keep that legacy living, so.
I think, you know, if you walk around these historic Japanese communities like in Crenshaw, you know, the poodling, right, of the pine tree, it's so distinctive. I think it's really important to kind of keep those trees living. So, yeah, I would say definitely, you know, we have a pine tree in our house. I think that the family house is one. Okay, so thank you all for having me here.
Thank you, that was wonderful. It brought back a couple things for me. My junior high art instructor, Mr. Omatsu, brought in his high school yearbook. And we thought, why did he bring in his high school yearbook? And I flipped it open, and it was, the picture of his school was taken from one of the gun towers at Manzanar, and it's barbed wire. And it's quite stunning as just a visual. And my high school graduation, Hiroshima played. The band played my high school graduation out in the San Fernando Valley.
What high school?
John H. Francis Polytechnic.